Welcome to the sixth video in this tutorial series. So far we have covered a wide variety of topics that media composers and orchestrators must be aware of. With this video, we are going to skip a lot of the classically based stuff I usually cover, and we're going to concentrate solely on recording sessions for film music. But this time from a rather unique point of view. For over the past few months, I've increasingly found myself on the other side of the studio wall, sitting at the piano sight-reading newly composed music, with my session player colleagues at my side. I haven't done this much session playing since I was a much younger man, and I must confess that it has been an eye-opening and somewhat shocking experience. For I've remembered many of the things I'd forgotten, and I learned a few new things, which I hope to share with you in this video. Most importantly, my piano playing experience has shown me that session players are true slaves to the sheet music in front of them. All the work you've done getting a cue approved, all the work your orchestrator has done, all the work the copyist team has done, well, it simply comes down to a piece of paper sitting on a music stand in front of the musician. Every single detail you have slaved over is translated to some black and white lines and dots on a page. If you thought in my previous videos I was overly obsessed with notation techniques, I think in this video I might even double down on my position. Most session players arrive to a session about 45 minutes before the downbeat, perhaps a little bit earlier if they got lucky with the LA traffic. Sometimes the players who have big setups, like the percussion, or large instruments like the contrabass and the harp, arrive even before the composing team. Now there are three basic personalities at a session, and it greatly affects how they prepare and think about performing the music in front of them that day. It also affects how they spend those 45 minutes before the downbeat. Firstly, there are the herd thinkers. These are mostly the sectional players sitting in the big string sections, who are reading off parts that have multiple other players reading as well. There is a certain comfort factor that these players have knowing that if they leave something out, it is nearly certain to be covered by one of their colleagues. I'm not using the concept herd thinking in any kind of negative connotation, for by necessity, these players have to blend and imitate their colleagues. If they don't, the entire section becomes undone. Just this weekend, I was at a recording session where we had to politely ask one of the players in one of the sections to play quieter and blend with her colleagues. As the section leader, she was consistently playing out louder than her colleagues. She was also using a more soloistic vibrato. Till we asked her to play and blend with the section, it wasn't a great sound we were getting. With this one player playing out and with different vibrato amongst the other section players, it made the whole section sound smaller. It also made the whole string section sound a little bit smaller and less blendy. It was not a very pleasing sound. The opposite of a sectional player is the solo chair player. These players have no backup. This might be the one harp chair, the piano, maybe the second clarinet, or any of the other players that have notes that will be covered by no one else if they don't play them. You will likely see these players spending their 45 minutes sitting at their chair, flipping through the pages of the music, looking for anything especially hard or fast, or anything marked solo. Sometimes you will hear them practicing very tricky things, and I bet they will be the least likely to go grab a bagel before the session starts. Then there are the section leaders, and they are a very unique breed. Not only do they play a solo chair, but they are responsible for communicating and possibly translating commands from the composer to their sections. Sometimes they are responsible for establishing the phrasing of style for their entire choir, and possibly other sections. A principal trumpet might dictate with his horns or words how a brass tutti is to be phrased. The first chair violin, or the concertmaster, is not only in charge of the first violins, they are usually in charge of the entirety of the string section. These chairs usually have a lot of solos in addition to their other responsibilities. More often than not, they are paid a premium scale for their extra services. When I was considering ways to present session playing for this video, I could only come up with one concept. There is only one way to explain what it feels like to be a session player. You literally have to become one. There is really no other way to explain it. So for this video, I've created a brand new piece of music with a piano part, and I'm going to ask you to play the piano part during this remote recording session. In a minute, I am going to ask you to pause this video, and when you come back, be sure to have a pair of studio headphones on and a piano patch loaded. If you want a more exact experience, load the Cinesamples Cine piano patch, set the volume on the patch to +3 dB, and set the proximity effect on, so you hear the high notes of the piano on the right, just as a pianist hears. If you want the most complete experience, you can pause this video and print out the sheet music and sit at your home piano with your headphones. I've left the link below in the description of the video. If you are interested in this experience, I encourage you to actually take this seriously and pause the video to situate yourself. Everything that will be covered after the playing of the cue will make more sense if you participate. I've done my best to make the piano part realistic but somewhat easy. In the event you aren't near a keyboard or aren't a keyboardist, do your best to mentally play along. If you are playing at your computer with your MIDI keyboard attached, be sure to set this video to full screen. I'll see you again in 10 seconds when we will begin the cue. So pause it now and I'll see you in 10 seconds. Okay, so before you on your digital music stand, you have a cue here. We are about to record with a medium-sized recording ensemble and a medium-sized scoring stage. I have the headphone and click level set to the way it would be at a recording stage. So for the next 5 minutes or so, I'm going to give you the complete experience of recording a cue as a session pianist from first reading on. Stay with me for 5 minutes or so, and then we'll break down everything. Okay, let's run through this 4/6 power play. It's 8 free clicks into bar 2. Okay, stand by, here it comes. Good luck, everybody. Okay, so welcome to Session Player World. If that wasn't a confusing and disorienting experience, you are either a genius or you are doing it wrong. I am going to use my experience to guess a few of the issues you may have had. We will talk it over a bit, and then we will run the cue a second time. But first, let's talk about something I'm sure none of you had anticipated. The real-life orchestral player experience is not from the audio perspective we are all used to as composers. The piano was situated by the recording engineer to sit right next to the percussion and the harp. You probably heard a bunch of banging away in your left earphone from your immediate neighbor to the left, the timpani. You probably heard a bunch of harp from your neighbor to the right. You probably heard a bunch of trumpet and other percussions, and much less of the strings that you are used to. This is almost the exact experience I had on a session about 2 weeks ago. I had totally forgotten that this happens. I was so very used to hearing everything from the full mic perspective in the sequencer. I did my best while programming the timpani part to demonstrate the uncertainness that players have on the first reading, for he too was sight reading. A few times on his part, I had him purposely early, like in bar 6 here. It can be very confusing when your neighbor who is playing a loud instrument is off. Additionally, classical timpanists are used to anticipating the beat a little bit, so their instrument blooms into the hall with the full ensemble. Anyway, let's get back to my guesses as to what went wrong when you played this cue. I'm guessing some of you were confused right off the top. The 8 clicks into bar 2 fooled one of the session players I showed this example to. I'm guessing you felt a little uncertain at bar 10 when the piano was playing opposite the timpani and the bones instead of with them in the previous bars. That feeling of uncertainness is something session players constantly have. I'm guessing you may have gotten quite lost around bar 15, where there's a time signature and tempo change. It doesn't quite feel in 5, even though it is notated as such. You may have gotten back on track in bar 17, when the tempo changes again. Unless you were diligently counting, I bet you were lost again around 29, as there was no obvious musical landmark to show where this phrase ends. You should note that when you get lost sight reading music, it is very, very hard to get yourself back on track. But one way to get back on track is via the use of cues. In fact, I bet this harp cue at bar 37 saved your bacon and allowed you to get back on track for this next phrase. I've often found harp players to be amongst the best players and readers in the whole orchestra. Additionally, I am guessing you were lost somewhere around here, as the ostinato can sometimes put the brain to sleep. I am guessing you were uncertain as what the tempo should be right here at your solo. I purposefully gave you only 1 click's worth of tempo change in an attempt to show you how confusing tempo changes might be. Okay, so now that you've heard the piece and had a minute to compose yourself, we are going to run it again. First passes are notoriously difficult to stomach as a composer. As composers, we are also affected by a similar but different sort of first pass effect. In the morning, have you ever come back to a piece you were working on that previous night and you were able to analyze it with a clear mind and clear ears? Well, I suggest you pay the most attention to those first passes after a large break. Don't be checking your email or on Facebook. It might be wise to even write down some text notes as your ears quickly become accustomed to listening to what you have. Here it comes. I'm guessing that pass was largely better, but still not perfect. Although this cue is only a minute and a half, it is somewhat difficult due to its tempo and time signature changes. This cue, in my opinion, is a very similar difficulty to the cue you might see at a common video game or TV session. In my estimation, an LA orchestra would read this 3 or 4 times before moving on. The final product would probably be a comp between takes 3 and 4. An LA orchestra made up of the finest players who had been playing all day might be able to crank this out in 2 passes if they were in a rush. About half the studios in LA have handy bar and beat counters that the players can glance at to see what bar they are in. This makes the counting of rests much easier. However, sometimes it is the case that these bars and beat counters are in a place that may be hard to look at. Let's draw some conclusions from this. I purposefully composed this music to be pianistically easy, quote unquote, but somewhat unusual. I tried to make it hard to anticipate what was coming next because I wanted you to feel the confusion session players regularly feel, especially on the first pass. I've found when sight reading as a session player, it sounds this confusing about 90% of the time. Only the slowest, most benign whole note charts make total sense on the first reading. The rest of the time, the orchestra is doing its very best to make sense of the sheet music and play what's written. There is very little room for thoughts of musicality beyond what is written on the page. The more times a piece is ran through, the tighter and tighter it can become until it finally reaches a point where it arrives at a sort of status quo plateau. At this point, you can give instruction to make the piece sound different, but more or less it will stay at this level of quality. I hope this video gave you a little bit of a clue as to what life is like as a session player. Additionally, I hope this video demonstrated how important your sheet music preparation is, as the sheet music is the only link to all of your hard work. This sheet music was prepared using a professional score template, and I used about the same amount of information a real session part would have. So you could very much consider this as an experiment as to what it would be like to be an actual pianist at one of these sessions. How did you fare?